Winterbourne House, that's in Portland Road, West 11, what is now known as Notting Dow.
My family have been in the area for over 100 years.
Just sort of around the corner from this school, my dad was born, and my mum was born in Latimer Road, which is not far away as well. So, you know, when they got married, they moved to Dalgarner Gardens.
So when I moved down to off Aldermaston Street, it was just off Warmer Road, where, before the flower was built, I think there was only about 2 Irish families there. People had lived there for an awfully long time.
Yeah, when my parents immigrated to England from Jamaica, they were ordinary labourers, and we were like from a working class background.
I was travelling all around the world, and I gave birth to my first child, my daughter, in Africa, and I needed to be somewhere a bit more safe, so we arrived in London.
I moved into the area because there was a lot of empty houses here, and I didn't have any money, and we could just find a house and get in there and make it into a home for a time, you know, so it was just to come and find somewhere to live.
The area is very much a much more working class area with multi-occupied houses.
Lancaster Road and the street behind it, Tavistock Crescent, were basically you'd call slums. Now, the paint was peeling, the more than one family to a room. It was quite bad. But when I say it was quite bad, it was quite interesting as well. It was vibrant and full of life.
Yeah, people lived on the street more in those days, I think. They lived, you know, all the doors were open, people used to sit on the front of the steps. And so streets, it used to have hundreds of people in them, and people mending cars on the street and living on the street.
And everybody's idea of the area who didn't live here was that it was very rough. And even if you did live here, like I had children in my class who lived on the Latimer Road side, I'd be like, oh, that's a really rough and dangerous bit, you don't want to go there. And they'd be like, but you live on Goulburn Road and that's a really rough and dangerous bit. So the whole area really had a bad reputation.
An old tenement house in the basement, and there was mice there and everything, you know, oh yeah, plenty of mice there. That kept us company, that did the mice.
There was something that houses could be infested with bed bugs and cockroaches and things, and you wouldn't see them, but they would live in the walls, and people had wallpaper on their walls, and apparently they would come out in the night time and walk all over your food and everything. So it was absolutely horrible thought.
There was 8 people, or 10 people, my mother and father, in 2 rooms. One was the kitchen, which 2 brothers slept in the kitchen, and the other 8 of us slept in one room, in the back room.
We didn't have a bathroom, we had to share a toilet, and we had to wash outside on the landing at the sink, and then when we had a bath, we'd have a bath about once a week.
Because some of the houses in the area, they never had bathrooms, they had an outside toilet. And one of the things I can also remember is to getting up at night time to go to the toilet. So I was very scared, so we used to have like a potty that I used to take in my room and do it and empty it in the toilet next day.
Well, I can tell you now, it was at the top of a 4-storey block of flats, and we was lucky. We had a 3-bedroomed house. Oh, well, it was a flat, but we had every bedroom had a fire in it, so you in theory, you was never cold. Not like some of my friends, but we also had a bathroom and a toilet indoors. Again, that was just unheard of.
The old tenement houses, everybody mixed together, everybody helped each other out, see? You had the basement, the ground floor, first and second floors, and everybody, if somebody was in trouble, somebody'd help somebody out, you see?
To squat a house, basically the house would be empty, and you'd look at it and you'd think, you'd have a look on the roof, because if people had taken all the slates off the roof to sell them or something, you know, the water would come in, it wasn't really good, but you'd have a look at the house, and if you thought that it was livable, then you'd find a way to get in there, so you'd have to break in, really, to be honest, and then you would have to change the locks. Then you'd have to stay there for a few days in case someone came around to throw you out. And then when you were there, some people lived in them and didn't ever make them better, because they thought that any minute they were going to have to get thrown out again. And other people would just try and make them as nice as they could because they didn't know how long they were going to be there. It depended on what your attitude was.
That started 1939, 3rd of September 1939, and we got evacuated from school down to Cornwall, and I worked on a farm there, I lived on a farm down there, but we was only there for 9 months and we came back again. And we lived through the war here, and well, things were pretty rough. Obviously, everything was rationed, all the food was rationed. You only got so much food a week, and that you see, and things like that. But it was very, very scary in the war. It was, and of a night time, especially when the bombers, the German bombs come over, and they was bombing the places. It'd be anything. You see 50 or 60 planes coming over of a night time and bombing and that. Yeah, it was very, very scary.
But we were bombed out. We were 100 yards or so away from that, and it blew all our windows out. It blew all our doors off, and everything we had that was loose, like cups or knives and forks, I think, was just sucked out by the blast. You never saw them again. They just were gone. Ended up in somebody's garden, so I don't know, but they were all gone.
Because we didn't have much money in those days, so my mum used to get scraps of meat, you know, the cheapest she could get, and we used to have mince and potatoes, and we used to have corned beef and rice. We used to have pilchards and rice, or sometimes, if we were lucky, we used to have a nice roast.
There was no television them days, see? And the only radio we had was my father was allowed to put the radio on when he came home from work, and nobody else was allowed to touch the radio. And that's all we had. So we was out most of the time.
For children of 3 and 4 to play on the streets was quite normal, and I was out the way if my parents, in this case my mother, to get on with the housework and cooking and cleaning and things like that, she was quite welcoming and letting me go out to play in the streets. It was still quite devastated. There was a lot of bomb debris. That's houses that had been completely blown up by the bombing from the Second World War. So we had vast area of playing on the bomb debris, and it was great fun.
When I was at Lancaster Road School, we used to go to Holland Park, but it was then private. And we used to go there, and we used to get over the wall, and the Holland House had been bombed in the war, so there was no one living there. And we used to go down and scrump the orchard. They had an orchard of apple trees and pear trees, etc. And we used to go and scrump it. And there were keepers around, and they used to chase us. But we done that. We used to do that quite a lot.
Another thing I used to do, I used to go around to the houses, and if people have thrown away any old clothes, I'd take it down to the rag-a-bone shop. A rag-a-bone shop years ago is where you can recycle things, empty bottles, empty metal, clothes as well. This was just after the war.
Tie a rope to a lamppost and use it as a swing, and you'd go around, you'd swing her out round and round in circles. We'd have another game where it was tin can Tommy, and because there was, say, cheating going on, it invariably ended up having a fight.
When I learnt to swim, now you shouldn't do this yourself, when I learnt to swim in the canal. Because we couldn't afford to go, when we was at school, we couldn't afford to pay to go. We went with the school used to take us swimming, but apart from that, of an evening or something, in the summer, I used to go with the canal swimming. Don't you ever do that, you lot, will you? Don't you ever go in there?
We had bomb debris, and we was lucky. We had a block of flats along the road from where I lived, and we used to get tins of corrugated iron and build barricades, and with all the bricks and slate and things like that around, and we would have a war, i.e. we'd be throwing bricks and bits of slate and bits of wood at the others, and it always ended up breaking up because invariably someone would finally get it with a bit of brick and ended up the hospital, or local doctors have it an eye stitched or something like that.
It was a cowboy show, and I love cowboys, and I still do. Yeah, and every Monday night I used to go over to the neighbours and watch the wagon train, and then a few years later there was another one called Rawhide. Keep rolling, 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 keep them donkeys rolling, keep them donkeys rolling, Rawhide. And growing up, This is what I can recall from my childhood memory. Though they're you're bringing flashback. I'm in the end of my ride. Get 'em up, get 'em up, get 'em up, ride 'em in, get 'em up, yeah. And you know, boy, you're bringing flashbacks now, yeah.
Right, because of the poor diet during the war, I had a very bad health problem, and they discovered this at a very young age, and I was sent to a school. It was then called Wood Lane Open Air. Really, it was predominantly just for you to get better. And so any day apart from when it was really, really cold or it was raining, you didn't do any lessons. You went out, you all had a little allotment to grow your own vegetables. And it was a fantastic school that way, but academically it was very poor because the emphasis was getting you better to go back into the real world.
I was in primary school. If you'd done something wrong, they take your shoes off you and you had to stand on a table in the hallway. They take you, and I often was on the table in the hallway. And one day I had enough of that, so I ran home in my stocking feet.
In them days, when we was about 12 years of age, somebody brought in a cigarette in the school one day, and I puffed it, which I shouldn't have done. I know I shouldn't, and you shouldn't do neither. But I puffed it, and I got caught by the school caretaker, and he took me up to the headmaster, and I got 3 on that hand and 3 on that hand with a cane.
I was finally declared fit to go to what they call mainstream schooling at the age of 13. I went to a school called St John's, but it was a very notorious school. It was very, very rough, and I'm going to be truthful, some of the kids there, I mean, they were more interested in the girls and fighting, and out of school, some of them turned to crime. And, you know, at the age of 13 or 14 and 15, some of these kiddies ended up going to Borstal rather than school because that's how bad and tough it was.
Because when I was little, I had red hair. So did my mum, so did my dad, so did my 2 brothers and my sister. So there was a market trader who'd always shout out, "Oi, Ginger!" And we'd all turn our head and he'd think it was really, really funny because we fell for it every time.
The butchers at that time used to have chickens hanging on the window, their feathers still on, and rabbits that had been killed and hanging there. And my daughter, it disgusted her so much that she turned vegetarian.
And we shopped daily because we didn't have a fridge until I was about 10 years old, I think.
Being Irish people like stew and bacon and cabbage. So, but that is quite cheap, and also you could do a great big pot of it and it went a long way. So children didn't have a great deal of choice. They couldn't say, "Oh, I don't like that, I'm not going to have it." You had to eat it or else go without, because people couldn't afford to buy different things.
It was always mum or the elder sister would go with the mother, perhaps go up Portobello Road or go to the local shop. And we had so many local shops. We'd have a butcher, a baker, literally a candlestick maker on the street where you got paraffin for your lamps.
There was an awful lot of dairies where you bought your milk, or where the milkman would bring your milk out, but if you didn't, you went to the dairy and you bought cheese and all that kind of stuff.
If she wanted to buy something and she didn't have any money, she would send me with a note to the local shop with a note to say, "Can I have a quarter of a pint of milk or half a pint of milk?" Put it on the slate. That meant that Mum would pay for it at the end of the week.
And for breakfast, we got bread from the bakery across the road when it was still hot in the morning for breakfast. So the butter melted on these hot rolls. And I can still remember the smell of the bread and delicious.
But if you didn't have a lot of money, in the fish and chip shops, you could get a thing called cracklins, yeah? And you should buy a tubpenny worth of cracklins. Cracklins was a floury bit that left over from the fish when it's fried, you know? And it was half nice with vinegar and salt.
None of the working people in the area, or very few of them, had baths in the houses. And so you went down to where Chiltern Baths to have a bath. And you paid so much money and you went into a cubicle with a big bath in it. And a man went along on the outside with a big key and he'd turn the water on from the outside and you would sit in your bath, and if you needed some more you was more hot, for instance, you shout out more hot for number 5, you know, because all the rooms were numbered.
And it was a dual purpose. You could go there to have a bath, but they had a big laundry, and it was a big communal place. And a lot of the mothers would take their laundry along there, and because they had all the facilities, they had the drying, they had irons there. It was quite luxurious in the sense that they didn't have to put up with doing it indoors with the steam and the washing and that.
There were big sort of like, there were sort of metal pieces like this, and each person would be in there doing the old-fashioned washing, you know, like by hand. And there was great big old drying machines and huge great mangles that if you got your fingers caught in would squash your fingers, you know.
It was also a meeting place socially, because you'd see more or less the same family there every Saturday.
There was a thing called the bag wash, where you put everything in a great big cloth bag, and my sister and I would take it up to the bag wash just up the road, and then you'd go back a few hours later and you bring it back, and by that time it was all wet, so it's really heavy. And then you bring it back, put it on the clothesline in the garden, and it would dry.
And I can remember hanging them out overnight, and it being very frosty, and they were all crisp and stiff like cardboard when I collected them in the morning. And then when they thawed out, they were wet again, so it was quite a struggle.
As a school kid, I used to go swimming, and I think there were 3 pools: a girls' pool, a boys' pool, and a mixed pool. And the strange thing now, thinking about the boys' one, you didn't have to wear a costume. You could just go in naked, which is kind of strange looking back on it.
I left school at 16, and then I went into full-time employment. Whiteley's, you know William Whiteley's? That was my first job. I was a trainee, sort of like in the retail trade.
I tell you what, every morning you knew what the time was, because at 7:30 in the morning, the gasworks route used to go up. It was the gasworks of Sainsbury's. There used to be the gasworks up there. The gasworks route used to go at 7:20 and 7:30, and then the White Knight Laundry, their route used to go at 8 o'clock, and it was things like that. So you didn't have a clock; you could tell the time.
There was much more small businesses in North Kensington. For instance, there was a steam carpet beating factory in Latimer Road, where lots of young people, when they left school, went to work. First of all, it's a dead-end job, but they used to get their first jobs there, then move on to something else.
And I was knocking down old bombed-out buildings then, for that, with a pick and shovel, stand up. If you worked a certain height off the floor, you got an extra penny an hour, what they call it. And if you worked in the basement where it was flooded, you got an extra penny an hour there. So whichever way you went, you got that little extra money, you know.
Well, I left school at 15, and my first job was in Vulcan Sheet Metal Works, which was in Latimer Road, underneath the railway arches. And we used to make a thing called colt cows and radiators. While I worked at Heinz Beans in Harlesden, it was a big factory where they produced them and tinned them and everything, and I worked there for a while. That was a lot of it. In the department I worked, there were 300 women and about 10 boys, and I was one of the 10 boys in the department.
I used to have an old pram, and I used to go around to houses, some houses in my neighbourhood, and within every neighbourhood there used to be coal yards, because don't forget, a lot of people didn't have central heating, and I used to go and buy coal for some of my local neighbours, and they'd give me 6p or 8p or whatever.
And there was a people named of Harris who lived on the ground floor, and he was a dealer, the fellow was. He had horse and cart, and he used to go around dealing, you know, picking up stuff and selling it and all that stuff. And that's what the life was then, you know. You earned what you could when you could, you see.
In later life, I worked at the local law centre, helping with giving housing advice, and I worked with the Kensington Chelsea College doing local history, which I done mainly with older people, pensioners. The youngest was 60, and my oldest student was 91, and they were very well behaved.
I was doing a paper round, and one day I saw the chemist do-it-yourself photography. And I bought this photographic kit that teaches you how to take photographs, how to develop, and how to print. When I first started taking, a lot of people liked my work. So I thought, this guy, let me start taking photographs of the family, my friends who I've grown up with, friends who I live amongst every day, the neighborhood, yes? And hoping that sooner or later there'll be a recording of it, yeah? And here I am 50 years later and documenting things.
We had a pub virtually next door, but with a shop in between. So when I was a kid with my sister, just about to go to bed, my stepfather would say, right, we're going next door, any problems, come and get us. And that's what they did. They played cards, talked, and drank.
There was three public houses in the length of Portland Road. And so most of the men, after an hard day's work, they would go straight into the public house, have a couple of pints and then go home and have their dinner. But sometimes later on they would go out again and they perhaps play dominoes or darts.
Most Irish men went to the pub in their spare time and played darts. And Irish women, well, if you had several children to look after, you didn't need a lot of spare time. And we used to do a lot of knitting. There was an awful lot of knitting went on in those days. It was not just for hobby, but it was very useful as well. So I used to knit school cardigans and everything for my children when they went to school. It was cheaper, it wasn't expensive. You could knit a school cardigan much more cheaply than you could buy one, if you got the right colour and then you got the badge like you have to put on it.
Yeah, there was a lot of parties. All of these houses around here, they've all got little basements. So a lot of people used to do parties in the basements, little private parties, and they'd put in a little sound system and play tunes, and they'd set up a little bar and make a bit of money to live off by having these parties. So these were called shebeens, or they were called blues dances, and there were basements everywhere where they were happening.
They would crop up and then they'd disappear. They might be there for a couple of months and then the police would do something about it, and they'd go somewhere else.
Well, the Mutoid Race Company came out of this idea of building stuff out of found objects. We used to get into a big old factory and we'd hang up cars like with chains. One factory we went into had the drains all blocked. It was full of water, so instead of taking the water out, what we did was we built bridges out of old bits of metal and then we cut the roofs off cars and put them in there and made it look like it was really deep. It wasn't very deep, but we made it look deep. And then we built a whole world. We built a giant spider's web out of pieces of rope that people could climb. And we built a big graveyard all out of pieces of metal, making the gravestones. And we made trees out of car exhaust pipes. And then we let a lot of people into this place, putting the music and lights. And it was a very, very popular party. And so we did it 3 or 4 times, and thousands of people came. And so so we did these all over this area.
Well, 10 Riddington Place is where Reginald Christie lived. And Reginald Christie was a murderer. And he murdered a whole number of women, including his wife. There was a film made about it. And Christie was an abortionist. He used to, when abortions were illegal, he used to do illegal abortions for money. And he used to, instead of giving abortions, he used to gas the women and kill them. He buried people in the garden, he put people under the floorboards, and in these alcoves. I don't know how many people were in the alcoves. He had to leave the house in the end, and another family took over. A West Indian family took the house over, and the fellow was in I think the kitchen, and he noticed that there were some alcoves that had been boarded up, and he thought he'd open them out. And he opened one out, and as he pulled it down, he looked in, and there was a face looking out at him from behind the thing. And he screamed his head off and ran up the road shouting murder and that. Christie went on the run, and he was eventually captured. He was down by the Thames River, and he was seen by somebody. He was captured there, and he was hung. When I was doing local history, most of my group came from somewhere else. Their families had come from somewhere else. I mean, just as an instance, in the 1930s, there was a lot of people come from Wales because the Great Western Railway links with Wales come here looking for work.
My parents stayed in Ireland, and the family, their sons and daughters, immigrated mostly to England to get work.
Yeah, when the call came out for the mother country, we all volunteered. Yeah, don't forget we were invited here. Yeah, and we never came here as destitute immigrants. Yeah, because we believed in the mother country. When I came here, you know, we had a lot of Irish immigrants and Hungarian immigrants, and it was mainly where new arrivals came to settle. You know, it was very hard to find accommodation. So in some of the signposts, even in the local newsagents, you'd see signs, no Irish, no blacks, no dogs, you know? And that's the period we went through, yeah?
Now, when I was young, I suppose about 7, 8, 9 years of age, we didn't see any, shall we say, foreigners, black people. We might see the odd one or two. In fact, one did move into Portland Road, and it was quite a novelty, and it sounds a terrible thing to say now, but we didn't know any different. And we used to sit outside this chap's house waiting for him to come out because we'd never seen a black person.
Playing with other kids, yeah? They used to feel my ears and call me Curly, or call me Fuzzy Wuzzy, yeah? And you know, I lived through that type of jibe.
My father was black, my mother was white, but I found that I couldn't get on with black kids very well because the names they used to call me, I was a half-breed and things like that. And then, so I moved towards the whites. And if they accepted me, that was fine. If they didn't, okay. But then eventually I realised that I had to move back to the black children or people because I was half black. So then I got to sort of change things like that. It hurts, that. It really hurts when you talk about those things, but anyway.
I remember when there was what they called the race riots in 1957, 58, where a fella called Mosley was causing trouble and trying to stir up trouble between black and white people. I remember him speaking in North Kensington, and I disagreed with him, so I used to heckle him. And some of his supporters used to chase me up the road because I heckled him and that.
The race riots in 1958, it affected me because if you lived in the basement or the first floor or the second floor, sometimes we had to put wire mesh. Yeah, you come out and you thought out of fear, you don't know whether you'll get attacked, even though I was attacked a few times as well, you know.
And following that, there was the murder of Kelso Cochrane, who was a West Indian carpenter who was murdered by about 6 young white youths. Arising from that murder, there was a very big funeral, which lots of white and black people went to together, and really that was the start of resisting racism.
And so many of my friends that were quite against blacks, they started to realise, well, they're no different than us. And we used to go to a club. It was a club in Portobello Road called El Portobello, and they used to play a sort of music that both the blacks and the whites liked. So it was a sort of meeting ground between black youths and white youths, and gradually white people become friendly with black kids and vice versa.
One of the things that came out of the race riots, etc., was the Notting Hill Housing Trust, which said that some of the problems arising from the race riots was bad housing.
There was major buying up by Notting Hill Housing Trust, so that they bought the houses with people in them and then rehoused them locally and in houses they'd already improved. And we did a lot of work with Notting Hill Housing Trust to persuade them that this was the best strategy, because otherwise all the local people were being forced out of the area and houses were being done up by private landlords into luxury flats for rich people.
We're now seen as rather naughty
in our day, because when we came, one of the things, if you wanted to draw attention to housing, was to take over places that weren't being lived in, and we called it squatting. So if you found a house that nobody was living in, and you knew how many people were not, hadn't got anywhere to live, you'd move in.
Maggie O'Shannon was living in the area that was going to be demolished to build the Lancaster Road West scheme, and she'd found out that she was going to have to live in the conditions she was living for another 7 years. There was raw sewage coming through from the toilet above into her kitchen from another family. And she'd spotted a house in the street that had been empty for a year, that was in much better condition. So she did a recce, and she decided, I'm going to move in and use squatting this house as a rallying call for the rest of the street to tell the council that we cannot wait 7 years. The conditions are too bad, the landlords are not doing repairs, these are private landlords. They did build barricades and they talked from the first floor, and we got the press down and we made a lot of noise about it, and we had guards on the house from us to help protect them, to make sure they weren't going to be evicted. After a couple of months, we had won, and we had got the Greater London Council to agree or to compulsory purchase the houses sooner and to rehouse the people sooner.
Where Sainsbury's is now, there was the big gasworks there. In about 1970, they decided they were going to close it. So we thought this was a good opportunity for the council to build housing for people who needed housing. There was quite a big waiting list for housing. So one night, 6 of us went into the gasworks. We were all in the Communist Party, and we went into the gasworks and climbed the gasometer, and we painted all down one side of it, 27 acres for council housing, hoping to stir up a campaign to get council housing. Well, the outcome of it then was that the council said they couldn't build housing on the gasworks because it was poisoned, the earth was poisoned. But it didn't stop them building a Sainsbury's on there, which sells food, which we thought was quite ironic. And
one of the big campaigns which I can still remember, is when they were building the flyover, and they've disrupted so much family. That's when a lot of family got broken up and they were transferred.
Or my future wife at the time, she lived in Walmer Road, and as they were building the flyover, it encroached you could virtually lean out the window and touch the motorway, the Westway, and they weren't going to pull the houses down. In fact, they were quite adamant, the local council, and I think it was the GLC at the time, and people said, well, we can't live like this, how would you like to live next to a motorway? And so the people that lived there, they demonstrated.
We had several demonstrations to demand rehousing. The first demonstration, it was on the local papers and everything. When they opened the flyover, local people got organised to go up there and wave banners and let their side of the story be known. So we would go up, we'd drive up in this van, and everybody get off and stand along the edge of the flyover waving our banners down to say rehouse us and all that kind of stuff. GLC was the Greater London Council, and they were the people who had built the flyover. We asked to see the housing minister and he wouldn't see us, so we decided to go anyway. And we sort of gate crashed past a security guard that was downstairs and dashed upstairs, and we went up onto the corridor of where they told us the housing department was, and sat outside in the corridor, and it was a beautiful corridor with a red carpet, and the children were all dashing up and down having a good time. And then we were called in to see the housing minister. Eventually they gave in and rehoused us anyway. So it was very exciting, I have to say, and people pulling together is so wonderful. When people fall out with each other, you get nothing done.
Nobody had any idea what to do with the underground, the side underneath it. And the summer we started, a group of people got together and said, well, all this space is clear, it's the school summer holidays, why don't we have a playground? So we had a playground. And we said, well, if we can have a playground, we can have the whole site. And that was, I think, 23 acres. So we set about trying to find out who controlled the space. And we discovered after a lot of effort
that the people who planned the motorway hadn't planned what to do underneath. And we found a man in County Hall in London who had a map which just had car park written underneath. And so a group of us got together with the local groups in the area and said, well, we don't want car park, we want something different.
There was a campaign to change that, and what happened there is that the people won that, and the Westway Development Trust, or the Westway Amenity Trust as it was called originally, was formed so that things under the Westway could serve the local community. And you have quite a lot of local community things under the Westway, particularly down over this side where you've got all the sports facilities, etc., being built.
I thought it was a foreign land somewhere. I thought it was in Eastern Europe or something like that.
Freston Road had wanted to completely redesign society, had a dream that we could live in a completely different way, where we all lived as a community and we all shared everything, we hardly used money.
They were hippies, they were free thinkers, they were people that didn't dress as people in society said they should dress.
We were a community of squatters at the time. We were a whole lot of people, quite a lot of us, about 150 people, all of us needing a place to live. We all squatted that area, which was a derelict area of houses that had been evacuated by the Greater London Council at the time, and left to stand there totally and utterly falling apart. So we took them over and we kind of made them livable, but it was very basic. I have to say that our community was quite an anarchic community, meaning some people never worked. There were quite a few people there some were artists who were doing their art or craft. And the Apocalypse of the Hotel was a bunch of absolute mad guys, men, who were, the original punks, if you like. They knocked out all the walls and ceilings inside. It was like a shell inside. And they were just swinging in rope ladders from one side to another. That was their home. So, total anarchy. We also had, which I think you'd be interested, we had a creche for little babies that we helped each other by, we just took turns in looking after, like 6 of us. And you can see me being a hippie here, look. We decided to fight our corner and we established our independent state, which was really just a very big exercise of getting on the agenda, being known, being heard, and it worked. And then after that came the Declaration of Independence. We asked the United Nations to recognize us as a state, and also we asked them to possibly, if needed, send us some protection, because we felt that the local council was not looking after us properly. So we may need even some army reinforcement or whatever.
So there are 120 of them, and they all changed their name by deed poll to include Bramley in their name, so that if they were going to be rehoused by the Greater London Council, they'd all have to be rehoused as one huge family. They had a Minister for Education who was aged 3. That was another of their jokes. The Greater London Council got a bit fed up with them in the end because they refused to move, but in the end they were all rehoused as the Bramley Housing Cooperative.
Because at that point we were already negotiating with the Notting Hill Housing Trust to build us purpose-built housing for our community. And we won. It was a victory. So, it's I think it's amazing. And I still think it's amazing after all these years.